Hey, what's up? Welcome to Updates with Mr. Warford. This is for my integrated social studies people. We're continuing on with Unit 4 about the executive branch. So when I last talked to you, we were covering what makes a good president. So leadership skills, listening ability, having a good sense of timing, having a good sense of knowing what the American people want out of a president and out of the other branches of government. That was what we were talking about before today. Now we're moving on to the roles and powers of the president. Remember that the executive branch executes or carries out the laws, and the job of the president and the job of the executive branch as a whole is talked about in Article 2 of the Constitution. So who makes up the executive branch? We've got the president, who's the leader of the country, the leader of the executive branch. We've got the vice president, who's the second highest office of the executive branch. We've got the cabinet, who is a group of advisors that talks to the president and he gets feedback from them, and then the bureaucracy, or the departments and agencies that make up the executive branch, the estimated 3 million or more government workers that make up the executive branch. So over time, presidents have gotten increased power and influence, mainly because times have changed. There's more complex situations and scenarios that presidents have to go through and try to sift through and figure out how to fix, both home and abroad. So with these complex issues, when they arise and the world undergoes changes, that means that power is going to increase. It was just going to be a natural thing that happened in the office of the presidency. And here's a way to illustrate that. So in the late 1700s, when George Washington was president following the Revolutionary War, he personally led about 13,000 soldiers, many who were just volunteers, to stop the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania. Flash forward to 1945, Harry Truman, president at this time, decides to drop 2 atomic bombs on Japan in order to hasten the end of World War II, or American involvement in World War II. And with, just his order, they send a plane over there and kill hundreds of thousands of people. So this may seem like it's very far away, they're very far away from each other, but really in the grand scheme of world history, this isn't a long time period that these two very drastically different events happen. So with more responsibility and more modern issues, presidential power has increased. So each president plays a different role, or has different roles at their disposal, and in those roles there are different powers that they use. So let's review those very quickly. So the first role is that of chief legislator. Okay, the chief legislator as chief legislator, the president can propose or veto laws, and can call special sessions of Congress, and delivers the State of the Union address to Congress. And here are the different checks on those powers that the other branches have. Whoops, I'm going to go back here. And we're going to review these more as the unit goes on, but you need to know this role of chief legislator and what powers the president has at his or her disposal. Next up, as chief executive, the powers that the president has are to enforce laws, treaties, and court decisions, appoint officials to office, also fire those officials within the executive branch, and then the president can give executive orders. Executive orders are important because they're basically like directives that have the force of law, but Congress is not involved in them. So they have the force of a law, but it's just an order given out by the president. It's important to know that if Congress or the Supreme Court deem an executive order unconstitutional or beyond the scope of presidential power, they can bring it into question. But a lot of times presidents use executive orders to kind of circumnavigate Congress to get done what they want. And here are some different checks that go along with that role of chief executive. These are different ways that other branches of government can check the power of the president. All right, next up. As Commander-in-Chief, this is probably a role you've heard of before. As Commander-in-Chief, the President has the power to be head of the armed forces and use it as the President wishes. The big check on that is that Congress gives the funds for the military, and Congress is the body that officially declares war. Next up, Chief Diplomat. So as Chief Diplomat, a diplomat is just somebody who represents something, okay? Powers as Chief Diplomat include setting the overall foreign policy of the country and appointing and receiving ambassadors. Ambassadors are representatives of the United States that either live in the United States or abroad and represent America and talk to different leaders around the world. Also, as Chief Diplomat, the President can negotiate treaties between the United States and other countries. And here are the checks on those powers. And I'm going to give you your own copy of these so that you have them to study and work on an assignment we've got coming up. So, as Chief Jurist, when you think of jury, think of court systems, think of the President being able to appoint federal judges, which this has happened recently in the past few years. The President has appointed a new federal judge when the old one passed away. Issuing pardons and amnesty, which essentially makes someone free if they are accused of a crime. And then here are the checks on those powers as Chief Jurist. The Senate can reject those appointments. And let's look at some examples of these, like real-life examples of roles and powers used by the President. So in 2007, America is in the middle of the war in Iraq, and Congress proposed a bill that would make an action plan for withdrawal from the war in Iraq. President George W. Bush at the time thought that this was just kind of the Democrats grandstanding or trying to make a political statement about being anti-war and how we shouldn't have been in the war. He did not agree, so he didn't sign it into law. He vetoed the bill. So the role he was using was the role of chief legislator. The specific power was vetoing bills. Let's look at another example. So Dwight D. Eisenhower made an order not passed by Congress, so he made a direct order that did not involve Congress to send federal troops to integrate public schools in Arkansas in 1957. So at this time, there was a law passed that schools had to be integrated, meaning you could not divide them racially, and some states were not doing that. So the president at the time said, we're bringing in the National Guard and we will integrate these schools. So what was the role and what was the power used? As chief executive, the president issued an executive order. So I'm hoping you're seeing how these connect, roles and powers. What we're going to do moving forward is a matching activity. You're going to read some historical examples of roles that were played by presidents and the powers that they used in each situation. So for example, you're going to read a historical account, and let's say it's about JFK. You're going to say, in this situation, John F. Kennedy, as chief diplomat, negotiated a treaty. Okay? That's how we're going to look at these matching activities. Don't get bogged down in the history so much as what was the role being used, what was the power being used. Okay? And we're going to go over these together before you turn them in. So don't jump the gun on turning them into Google Classroom yet, because we're going to review them together. Have a great day. If you have any questions, let me know. Peace.